Okay, so it's 5 past. I'm going to get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. My name is Helen Francis. I'm the coordinator at Rotherham Climate Action, and I am part of the Nature Recovery Group for Rotherham. I first got involved, I guess, within the world of climate issues and climate change through traveling, because I used to work on cruise ships and saw how beautiful the world is. Came back and wanted to do something about it to make sure that future generations have the opportunity to see the same. So that's just a little bit of an introduction from me. There are going to be 2 other speakers as well, but I'll let them introduce themselves when it comes to their part. If you do have any technical difficulties at any point, then please, I think the easiest thing to do is to leave Zoom and come back in, because 9 times out of 10 that sorts all the issues out. But if you do have any other technical issues, feel free to put them in the chat box and we will have a look and try and sort them out for you. As I mentioned before, I'm going to keep my eye and make sure that everyone is on mute, just to make sure that the speakers won't get distracted when they're delivering their parts. But if you do have any questions or comments, you're more than welcome to put them into the chat box. We are going to be monitoring that throughout the session. And also, if you've got some time at the end, then hopefully we'll get to address them, or we'll have a look after the event and communicate that back to you. So we are going to be staying past 8 p.m. as well. So if you would like to stay on the call, if there's anything that comes up that you'd like to discuss further, then you're more than welcome to. We will also be sharing our contact details. So if you did want to drop us an email after or get in touch with us a few days later, something pops into your head, then you're more than welcome to. So to introduce the event tonight, it's pretty obvious. It's about nature recovery in Rotherham. We're going to be talking about what the nature state is currently, and that's going to be from Nikki Rivers from Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust. I'll let her introduce herself when it comes to it. And also we're going to be talking about how that links to us locally as well as globally, you know, following COP26 as well. And that's going to be from Deborah Gibson, who is from the Environment Action South Yorkshire group, who is part of our Rotherham Nature Recovery group as well. So let's get to it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over to Nikki Rivers to introduce herself and to get the event started.
Thank you, Helen. Really good to see so many people here tonight. We didn't know how popular this would be or not. So my name's Nikki Rivers. Like Helen said, I've been working at the Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust for 14 years. So though I don't actually live in Rotherham, I live in Sheffield, but I have been working in Sheffield and Rotherham for all that time and working with a number of groups and individuals in Rotherham, but loads of new names tonight, which is fantastic, because part of tonight is reaching out to make new connections and have conversation with people that we've not spoken to before. So it's fantastic to see so many people. I'm just going to start tonight with a short animation from the Wildlife Trust nationally, and it was made for COP26 to make the link between climate change and nature. It's just a couple of minutes long, but we thought it'd be a nice way to kick things off. So I'm just going to play that for you now.
We all need nature, yet we've exploited our natural world and the climate to breaking point. Wild places are disappearing, half of UK wildlife is under threat, temperatures are rising and extreme weather events are on the increase. And as the nature and climate emergencies worsen, the threat to life on Earth escalates. But it doesn't have to be this way. We have the chance for a better and wilder future. We can create a world where people and wildlife thrive alongside each other. We must stop the burning of fossil fuels and reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And we must also let nature help tackle climate change and adapt to its impacts by restoring and connecting up woods, salt marsh and peatland. Nature can store carbon, provide clean air and water, protect us from flooding and extreme weather, and provide the food we need to survive. The wildlife trusts have been working hard for decades to help nature recover, bringing back wildlife once lost from our sea and land. But we need you. We need to be bold. We need to take decisive action. And we need to work together. Every action, big or small, makes a difference in the battle against nature loss and climate change. It's not too late to solve this. Let's act now for a wilder future.
So I hope everybody could see and hear that okay. Just wanted to show while we've got COP26 in our mind, although of course it's not just about climate change, about nature's for nature's sake as well, and how amazing the natural world is. So I'm just going to share a few slides with you now. Helen, can you give me the thumbs up if you can see that okay? Great. Okay, so we've called this Nature is in Trouble because sadly it is. Just right, my doesn't like my full. Yeah, there it goes. Nationally, biodiversity, which is the diversity within species, between species, and of ecosystems, is declining faster than any time in human history. And that's from a UN report. So that's pretty stark. And the actions that we're supposed to be taking are not nowhere near enough. So in 2010, the UN set 20 targets to halt the decline of global biodiversity by 2020. And today, of these 20 targets, only 6 have been partially met and the rest have failed. So this is where words aren't enough. You know, it needs to be bold action at all levels. And it's not just global biodiversity, it's not just on the other side of the world, of Brazilian rainforests, it's also here in the UK. In fact, the UK is one of the most nature depleted countries in the world. And it's happened over a long period of time, but also since 1970, there's been drastic declines in many species, as shown in the UK State in Nature report. Not all species, some actually doing okay, some aren't changing, but we've got in the red there, 35% of species in England have decreased. So that's the biggest number, more decreasing than staying the same or increasing. And 31% are found in fewer places than they were. So that's just since 1970. And the result of that is that 13% of species in England are threatened with extinction. And 36 plant species have already become extinct. So this is happening here on our doorstep. And I say it's not just a problem far away, it's happening right here. The Mammal Society produced a report last year that said 1 in 4 mammals are now threatened with extinction. Again, that's in this country, in England. So what's happening close to home in Rotherham? Probably many of you don't spend as much time looking at maps as I do, but it's very interesting when you look at some of that Rotherham on a map, and you can see here it's pretty parceled up into little fields and parcels, and the towns, and obviously the smaller villages and the bigger town. It's, you know, it's quite fragmented, you can see from this, just on this Google map. What is the state of Rotherham's nature? So we've got the UK State of Nature report. A few years ago, we did a Sheffield State of Nature report, which was a big exercise involving lots of partners and quite revealing. But a mixed picture as well, some winners and losers. But we don't know what Rotherham State Nature Report is fully, because we've not really pulled together all the data. There is some data out there from Rotherham Biological Record Centre, which is hosted by Rotherham Council, Sorby Natural History Society, publications, and Sheffield Bird Study Group, but we haven't done that exercise of pulling that all together yet. So a bit of a question mark. We do know this is that that data from the Sheffield Bird Study Group that there are some bird species declining. This is from the Rotherham Data Hub online. Won't be all bird species, but some of them certainly. And Bob Croxton, who I think is on this call, who's a very experienced local naturalist in Rotherham for many years, wrote this rather sad article for Sorby Natural History Society quite recently called Memories of Rotherham Water Voles. It's a sad state of affairs when water voles are just a memory in Rotherham. And that's just in the last 40 years that Bob's written about. So what's going on? What's happening to the wildlife? Well, there's lots of different pressures at different scales. Some are large-scale pressures, such as changes in farming management and water management. Some we have more or less control over, like invasive non-native species coming in. Things we have more control over, like the way woodlands are managed. And there's a lot of pollution, all different types of pollution. You know, some pollution is really cleared up in South Yorkshire. The rivers are slowly getting better, but there are other kinds of pollution like pesticides as well. So it's not a done deal, pollution. And urbanisation, so that's developments, roads, traffic. And then there's the smaller stuff that an individual might have some control over, such as front gardens being paved over, loss of garden hedges to fences, pesticide use in gardens, and reduction in engagement with nature, which is really important because if people are not going out and experiencing nature, they're far less likely to care about it and want to take action to protect it or enhance it or restore it. So we mustn't forget that. And there's neglect and damage even to sites that's supposed to be designated for nature. Rotherham has 94 designated local wildlife sites, but only about a third of those are in what's called positive conservation management. This is one Cancler Woods where the edge has got sort of nibbled off recently by a private owner to expand their garden. That shouldn't be happening. Here are a couple of slides from Bob Croxton, who I mentioned earlier, showing another local wildlife site. This is Keppel's Field, also a local nature reserve. And on the left, it's sort of in good management. Cattle are grazing it. There's lots of ground nesting birds, lots of wildflowers. And then just in 2020, that management isn't happening anymore. And the quality of the site has gone downhill, it's overgrown and doesn't support those rarer plants anymore. And another example from Bob, Catcliffe Flash, which some of you may know, it's the local nature reserve. It's very undisturbed for the birds. Bob has told me he knows it extremely well. And the top left shows a number of trees that were used by roosting birds and a large starling roost. And then over the years, top right, those number of trees have gone. So the birds have less opportunity to roost. So some need to go elsewhere. But what I like about this is that Bob noticed these changes and he took action to put some posts in, like PE benches, don't they? Posts in for the birds to come back and roost. So that just shows that an action can, you know, restore the quality of a place like that and understanding what's going on. And Bob has many more slides like this showing that, you know, some places got worse and some places have actually got better as well, sort of ex-industrial places and so on. So that's a whole nother slideshow from Bob to see his full collection, but just a couple of examples from him there. There's another problem in South Yorkshire still, even in 2021, persecution of wildlife. So there are still people in Rotherham who, you know, set dogs on badgers and set snares where they shouldn't be doing and put poison out for wildlife. And this is from the South Yorkshire Badger Group. All this information, it's shocking to see this still going on today in our patch. I mentioned invasive non-native species earlier, So these are species come in that might cause issues for some of the native species. So you may have heard of things like Japanese knotweed or Himalayan balsam. We've also got American signal crayfish, which outcompetes our native white-clawed crayfish. And then we've got smaller things like harlequin ladybirds, New Zealand flatworms, and American mink there, who unfortunately like water voles, a tasty snack, which explains Bob's sad story earlier. And you can see from the graph the numbers of the species increasing over time. That's actually a Sheffield graph, but it's probably quite similar in Rotherham actually. We also have diseases and pests coming in. So this is ash dieback that you may have heard about in the news, which is going to change sort of landscape of some of the wooded areas. And of course, the big one is the changing climate. This is data from Sheffield, because we couldn't find such a long data set for Rotherham. So I don't think there is one exists in quite this format. But it shows quite starkly that the steep rise in mean temperature in blue and sun hours since 1980 or 75, 1976, probably that peak is, isn't it? Going up over that time, which is basically my lifetime, from the time before that. So all this put together, we decided that nature is really suffering an emergency in Rotherham, as it is in the rest of the UK and the world. So what we want to do is declare a nature emergency for Rotherham, because we think it's got to that state. And Helen's going to talk a bit more about what that means later. And why does it matter? So it matters for nature's sake, as I mentioned earlier. We don't want to lose nature around us for nature's sake. You know, why should it be lost to humans? But also, as said in the video, nature provides so many benefits for humans as well. There's some fancy names for this, like ecosystem services and natural capital. Here's one example of carbon sequestration, and it really matches where the natural areas are in Rotherham. So from what our point of view, and from Rotherham climate action point of view, is that the climate and nature crises, the climate and nature solutions together, because they're interlinked, they're not separate. So we think, you know, we need to look at these things holistically together. So we've formed Nature Recovery Rotherham, and what is that about? So what we'd like to do is raise the profile of the nature emergency in Rotherham, because this is our patch. It's happening all around, happening in the UK, as I said, happening in South Yorkshire. And want to reach as many people as possible with this message that nature's in crises, and also then work together on a plan and what people can do, what actions ordinary people can take to help with this crisis. We don't just want to be in doom and gloom and despair about it. We want to support you to take action. And Helen's going to come back to that later about what you can do and how you can get you involved. So we think we need a nature recovery strategy for Rotherham to halt any further losses and start putting nature back into recovery. And for the community, you people here and other people who aren't here tonight, to be involved in that. So we think we need more land and water that's great for nature. There's some research out that suggests we need about 30% of land and water that's great for nature for it to recover properly. And for that to be as connected as possible as part of a nature recovery network. We need a whole range of actions for habitats and species, and for access for people to some of those areas for the reasons mentioned earlier. And these are some of the sorts of things that we need in that plan. Say more land and water great for nature, conservation plans, perhaps, pesticide reduction. These are just some examples. And some of those will be big actions for council or Yorkshire Water or farmers, and some of them will be small actions that everybody can take, and monitoring and recording wildlife as well. So you might think, well, hold on, we've got some nature reserves out there. Aren't they doing the job? Aren't they enough? Here's a map of the local wildlife sites in Rotherham that I mentioned earlier, and our trust reserves in Rotherham, which are just a few in red, and local nature reserves, ancient bits of fragments of ancient woodland in green. And that covers about 12% of Rotherham. So not 30%, we're quite a long way off that. And if you take out the bits that aren't in positive conservation management, you're down to about 7%. So obviously working on that 5%, getting them in good condition is an action, but also think about a bit bigger as well. What about the bits in between? Can we start to join things up a bit? This is an example of what a nature recovery network might look like. We're working on actually a much better map now, but it's so new, I can't show it to you. But the concept is really about bigger sites, better sites, more joined up sites, and more of them as well. And it's going to be, you know, not just nature reserves, but bits in between, which could be verges, gardens, allotments, streets, schools, all sorts. You've got to start thinking about the bits in between, churchyards. And can we think, you know, really brave into the future? What about bringing that water vole back? What about some of the other species that are missing that should be here, like beaver or pine marten? Let's be brave, and at least in our thinking. And for this to happen, we need, and there's, again, it's based on some research, about 1 in 4 people taking action for nature. So as I say, it's not just about what the bigger organizations can do, it's about reaching to individuals, communities, businesses, small organizations. So see, what can you do to be part of helping nature to recover? And I'm so pleased to see such a spread of people across Rotherham from the chat, from all different parts of Rotherham. I think that's so important, because, you know, Rotherham is not a city. You're all spread out. So this is really part of it in Rotherham. What can you do in your area? How can you join to the bigger picture? So what can we do? It's about acting local but thinking global. And I'm going to have a little break there, because I've probably filled your mind with ideas, hopefully. And what we've scheduled in a quick sort of 3-minute comfort break, so you can either have a stretch and start thinking about things before Deborah speaks, or if you'd like to stay where you are, I'm going to show another film, which is our favourite David Attenborough.
Nature has been there for us when we needed it the most. Yet we have allowed our natural world and climate to reach breaking point, with almost half of our UK wildlife in decline and some of our best loved species at risk of extinction. As the climate emergency intensifies, the threat to life on Earth becomes ever greater. But we have the choice of a better and wilder future. A future where wildlife thrives alongside people. A future where nature helps us in the fight against climate change. We know that we need to stop burning fossil fuels, but we must also recognise the role of nature in helping us turn the tide. We must bring wildlife and wild places back on an ambitious scale, in turn creating new livelihoods and protecting the planet for future generations. Our lives depend on it. Nature has extraordinary powers to lock up carbon dioxide, to provide clean air and water, to help protect us from flooding and extreme weather, and to provide the food which sustains us. For decades, the wildlife trusts have been leading the way to put nature into recovery, bringing back precious salt marsh and peatlands, and reintroducing beavers, our natural water engineers. But we can't do it alone. We need bold action, supporting local communities and landowners to create thriving and connected wild places on land and at sea. It's not too late to win the fight against the climate and nature crises. Given the chance, nature can recover in the most remarkable ways. But we need to act quickly. The time is now to create a wilder future.
So we all have a bit of David Attenborough. I'm going to pass over to Deborah now, who's going to talk to you a bit about what you might want to do to get involved. And remember, this is about how we can help you as well. So I'll pass over to Deborah. I'm showing the screen, aren't I, Deborah?
Yes, please. Yeah, I'm going to ask Nikki just to move the slides on. So every now and again, I'll just say new slide. So basically, we're just asking how we can think locally and act globally. And the image that we've got here, maybe I should just introduce myself a little bit first before I move on. I'm Deborah Gibson, obviously. I'm from an organisation called Environmental Action in South Yorkshire. And Environmental Action in South Yorkshire grew out of me being a member of Hartle Against Fracking. Now, I don't know if any of you remember, but very recently there were several villages nearby who were under threat, two of which were in South Yorkshire and the Rotherham area. Once the government put a moratorium on fracking, I was looking around for something to do. So we decided we would do something much more positive rather than something against. So hence Environmental Action in South Yorkshire, hence being part of Rotherham Climate Action, hence being part of the nature recovery. So basically what we've got here is a slide looking at what we can do. It's not all in doom and gloom. As David Attenborough says, it's actually one of the things that nature will do naturally. That's the whole point of nature, if we can give it a helping hand. Okay, next slide. Thank you. So we're thinking very locally here. We're looking at community engagement and action in Rotherham. This is in Clifton Park. This is a group that's involved with Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust. And they're connecting people with nature. And this is one of the very first steps that we can take. As soon as we start putting ourselves into the natural world, we start to experience the natural world, we start to think about it. The picture on the left is actually in Clifton Park. The picture on the right is making bird feeders to go out there into nature to encourage more natural activity. Okay, next slide, please. And again, this is part of that same project, Partnership and Working Delivery, and it's working with people in and around the Rotherham area with Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust. So you've got people inviting other people into their gardens, helping out, and it's people actually getting involved not only with nature but with one another, and through that with nature. Okay, next slide. And this is something that's very local to me. This is a little project that we started, and again, this is all about people and nature. There were 2 or 3 of us who wanted the council to reduce the amount of pesticides being used. We were really aware that there's nothing manual happening in terms of weed and pavement organisation, just keeping things weed free. And the council were coming along and just leaving a whole load of toxic chemicals lying around. So we asked them to stop doing it, which they did, but then they did nothing else. So we decided that we would just stop moaning about them not doing it, and we would get on with doing it ourselves. So the first event that we did, so the little journal down there on the right is the first part that we did, and we cleared the weeds, we cleared away the dog poo, and you know, stuff like that is so important in terms of communities. It might seem inconsequential, but it isn't. It's what really exercises people. So you start with what exercises people. So 3 of us did this. We decided we'd do it again. We advertised it. We got half a dozen. The next time we did it, we got a dozen people. And the 2 guys in the middle, this is kind of how community works. The two guys in the middle didn't know each other, and they got on like a house on fire. One of the guys was new to the village. He didn't really know anybody, and now he's coming to all sorts of community actions in the village, and it's just lovely to see. Okay, next slide. So not only is it working from your own garden or a small community space, one of the things that I'm doing in this part of the talk is to sort of make the connections with the much wider context. So we're looking at, we have a very small wildlife area in our gardens. We grow flowers, we have grass. There's all sorts of activity going on underneath that we can't see. We grow flowers, things come along. And it doesn't matter whether you have a large or a small plot. You know, you might have a balcony. Put a couple of pots on, you'll get butterflies, you'll get bees coming along. They come along incredibly quickly. It amazes me how quickly things settle in. Put yourself out in the wider landscape. There are all sorts of organisations who are doing all sorts of rewilding activities. So, you know, you might be interested in getting out there and helping with those. Okay, next slide. I just love this slide, absolutely love it. I have no reason for putting it in other than I love it. Just pardon the weeds, we're feeding the bees. Next slide. Wildlife counting and recording. Do you know, if we don't count and record, we don't know what our baselines are. If we don't know what our baselines are, we don't know what percentage to increase or decrease, or, you know, where we're coming from. So we need to know how many animals there are in the area, how many insects, what kinds of different species of flowers. And as volunteers, we have a great deal to do in that. Litter picking, we can actually get involved. Children get involved. Children get involved in counting. You know, counting the amounts of litter there is. They absolutely love it. And so part of this is actually you start small and get bigger. And people, you just start, a bit like the one in our local village. You just start and people come along. It has a natural growth. Okay, next slide. And I put this one in just as an example, how you can start small and get bigger. You know, Greta Thunberg, as an example, she started this all by herself, small person, small voice. For some reason, she just hit a zeitgeist, I suppose, but actually people started to listen. And whatever we do, there will be somebody who listens or pays attention to whatever it is that we're doing. We just get bigger and bigger. And so we start joining ourselves up in the same way that we would like nature reserves to start joining up. Okay, next slide. One of the things that we can do is kind of be more organised. So campaigning and lobbying, this can be done all by ourselves. I spend a fair amount of time writing emails to people, particularly my local MP, to members of the council, not just randomly, but because I have an issue that I would like them to follow up. And there's something about just asking them very specific questions. If you don't know an answer to something that you think that your MP or a council member might have, ask them about it. So this is one example, Go Peat Free. This was a campaign from the Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust, removing peat from our compost, bags of compost that we buy. And that is so important. It's a carbon sequestration. It holds carbon, peat. And if we leave it in the ground, carbon stays in the ground. So, you know, there's a campaign to get involved with. Next slide, please. Thank you. Craftivism, art and craftivism. You don't even have to go outside and get cold and wet if you don't want to. You can stay indoors, you can sew. And there are groups around, there's a group involved, which is where these pictures come from. There's a group involved in Rotherham Climate Action, who are a group of craftivists. They make things that are related to the natural world. It speaks to the people who need to listen. If you send them a little gift with a world like on a heart, like the picture on the right, it actually touches people's hearts. You know, something that's handmade that you've actually spent a bit of time doing. The big rug on the right, it's a beautiful thing. It's a work of beauty and it says so much. So there's all sorts of ways in which you can get involved. Okay, next slide, Nikki, thanks. And one of the things that it's important to know that, you know, even if you do work alone, you aren't alone. So this is part of the wider context. You have your local councils, you have the broader councils, you have the government, and then you have something international, the United Nations COP26 that has just finished. Okay, next slide, Nikki, thanks. The whole purpose of this is that it's actually at a high level. So you've got scientists, you've got NGOs appearing and speaking, you've got campaigners from right across the world, you've got, unfortunately, industry lobbyists, but actually their presence is important, because if they're not involved and they're not held to account, then there will be no change, because we live in a world that is governed by money and the way money exchanges and the kinds of deals that are happening. So if we don't invite industry to our table, as it were, and we don't speak to them, then they don't hear us. Okay, next slide. Thank you. And this is one of the ways in which we can hold those high level organisers, lobbyists, policymakers to account. We'll all have seen the footage, and I bless the media for actually covering it this time. People take to the streets, and it's hit the news big time, which is brilliant. We've got the agenda from COP26. So it's looking at fossil fuel production and use, methane, CO2. This is not an exhaustive list either. Particle emissions, energy provision, finance. The finance is so important. Transition to fossil-free net zero, which is where I come in. My background is renewables technology. We're looking at agriculture and forestry. And some agreements have been made and some agreements haven't. The last item there is climate justice, and that is really, really important, because there is no change unless it's a just change. And those people who are part of the world, who are developing countries, are exploited appallingly. And so unless we have that kind of justice, because we as human beings are actually part of nature, and it's something that we forget at our peril. We are made of exactly the same atoms as the rest of nature. You know, we're made of the same kinds of atoms that grass is made, you know, the voles that we're losing. So we need to think and remember that if we lose any part of nature, we're losing part of ourselves, and we will not last. So the United Nations not only organises the COP26 for climate change, and we're coming up to COP27 next year, we're looking at COP15, which is in Kunming in China, early next year, and it's looking at global biodiversity. So we're looking at nature here. Okay, next slide. This is actually part two. Part one pretty much set the agenda without making any decisions. And we're hoping that some decisions will definitely be made early in 2022, because the UN reports that world leaders have failed miserably to meet a single biodiversity target. And this is 12 years ago in Aichi, while science shows that humans are causing the 6th mass extinction event in the history of planet Earth. So it really, really is important that something happens at Kunming next year. So the agenda remains pretty much the same. And one of the, so it's okay, you can move on. Oh yeah, no, go back again, Nikki, sorry, yes. Just basically to say, this is part of the agenda for COP15 too. So we're looking at conserving at least 30% of the world's oceans. So it's very, very similar in the global context to that which is local in the Rotherham area. At least 30% needs to survive and thrive. And at least that has to happen by 2030. And what we're looking at, again, very, very similarly, is looking at controls on invasive species, reducing plastic pollutions, but actually supporting nature positively in every sense of the word. Okay, next slide, Nikki, thanks. So basically, this is our last slide. If you and or your group have an idea, honestly, just go ahead and do it. You can start small. You can start all by yourself if you want to. Ask a couple of friends to get involved. Do a bit of background research. Just go ahead and do it and tell other people what you're doing, and it will grow. Thank you for listening. Nature recovery will occur. Helen's going to take over now and kind of take on the next steps and invite you to get involved in whatever way you want to.
Thanks, Debs, for that. That was really, really good. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more context of the local and what's happening global. And also just to remind you as well, there might be some things that you as groups are doing already. And if you want any support with what you are doing already, feel free to get in touch. That's what we're here for. Or you might think, oh, we'd like to do something, but we're not sure what that is yet. Get in touch and let's have a discussion about it. I know, Chloe, you mentioned in the chat box already that you'd like your staff and students to potentially get involved with maybe litter picking. They are the conversations we want to be having, because ultimately they do link into the nature recovery. And also this presentation that we're giving to you tonight is a public one. It is for the residents of Rotherham. If you are part of a group, or if there are a few of you that would like to discuss this in more detail, or you think, well, actually this will be really useful to deliver this to a group I know, then feel free to get in touch. We're in the stage of spreading the message, making people aware of why we need a nature recovery. So feel free to get in touch if that is something you would like us to do. And also, please tell us what you're doing, because we would love to share it. I know that over the last 6 months or so, as part of Rotherham Climate Action, I've been blown away as well by how many litter picking groups there are and how much they are collecting and what great work they are doing. Now, I've done a little bit of Facebook stalking and have approached them, but actually they are great things that we together can be sharing and letting people know who are in the circle as well, who are aware of it, but also to share it within local newspapers or online to reach those residents as well that that might not be involved with anything, but see it and go, actually, I'd like to be involved in that as well. Because the more of us there are doing little things, then the bigger impact we have. So what we've covered tonight is about, what nature is about, thanks to Nikki and Debs, and it links in locally and globally, but also with a few local examples that we've shared with you. But what are our next steps for nature recovery in Rotherham? So we are in the process of mapping out our journey, and it's going to be quite a big journey, an exciting journey, and that does include many steps. But what we would like you to do today is one step, is to take one piece of action that we would like you to take to kind of, which is the beginning of this journey, really. And that is to simply sign up. And if we can go to the next slide, because it shows you an example of what that looks like. This is the form that's on our website. We're going to put the link to it in the chat box. Really, the main thing we are asking for you tonight is if you support the need for a nature recovery in Rotherham, then we would like you to sign up, because what that does is it shows us and it allows us to collect people, numbers of who would like a nature recovery, which in itself is powerful. Bear in mind, we will keep to being GDPR compliant as well, so all your data will be looked after. And also you will be able to receive email updates, keeping you in the loop, what is coming up, and also what are the steps that you could take in the future. But we just wanted to keep this really simple tonight, to share with you what nature is about, and what step you can take right now by signing this form or after this event to show your support for this. Once you have signed up, it means that you have personally declared your support. And what we are going to be doing over the next few months is we're going to be spreading the message in the lead up to Wednesday, the 23rd of March. Now, on this day, this is where we are publicly going to be declaring to everyone that we declare a nature emergency for Rotherham. And this is where we are going to be asking you to tweet, post, shout about the declaration, to create a big hype and to really gain attention. And this power and this awareness and this being online and in newspapers will allow us then to get the council's attention, for example, to hopefully influence them to declare this too, which will mean that we will be able to work with them, hopefully, on their climate action plan. Now, if we go to the next slide, Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust have already done this in Sheffield, and they've had great success working with individuals and partners. So here are just a few examples of what was shared on their declaration day. And I remember logging onto Twitter, and it's all I could see. And that's what we want as well, the same with Rotherham. We want not just for you to declare it, but for you to share it with your community, your neighbours, your family as well, so we can get as many people as possible in Rotherham declaring that we need a nature recovery and that there is a nature emergency. And with their big campaign in Sheffield, they were able to get a lot of people declaring it. And as a result, they're actually now working with the council and working with organisations towards a plan of actually making sure that something is in place to be able to look at what that nature recovery looks like in Sheffield. And that is the path that we want to follow as well for Rotherham. So thank you so much for listening to that bit. I am going to plug a little bit on this bit before I end the event for you all tonight, and just a reminder that we are going to be staying on as well past 8 p.m. so if you do want to discuss anything or ask the working group, you're more than welcome to stay. But one thing we are looking for is for more people to join our working group, so to volunteer, to help us spread the message and to really help us be part of that planning and to help us decide what that journey is going to look like in the future, and hopefully to work with the councillors, MPs and the community organisations as well, to make sure that we're not just looking at nature recovery, but we're doing it all together as a community and as Rotherham as well. So if you are interested in this, and hopefully some of you are, please, because we are looking for some fabulous volunteers to join our working group, then please drop us an email on that email that's on the screen there and is in the chat as well, and then one of us will be more than happy to have a little conversation to understand as well what you would like out of it, what can you commit, etc., and then we'll go from there. So if we go on to the next slide, which is the end one, just to say thank you again, thank you so much for attending tonight and for taking the time out to be with us and to listen to us share our knowledge around nature and what the next steps are. Just to remind you as well, please sign up to that form. It's really important that we get as many people as possible to declare that we do want a nature recovery, and feel free to share it as well with people that you know. You signing up as well, we're going to be keeping you in the loop. We're going to be sending emails as well, so and we will also send up a follow-up email following this event with the copy of the slides, the video recording, and just a recap of what we touched on tonight as well, and the next steps. So thank you everyone so much. I'd like to say a thank you again to the facilitators, so Nikki and Debs for sharing their knowledge. We are staying online as well for a little bit if you would like to stay on and chat. I don't know, Ian or Megan, if you've managed to have a look at the chat box, if there are any questions at all that could be worth asking now, because we have got 5 minutes. But for those of you that have come, and thank you so much for coming and for listening to us, and sign up and we'll keep you updated and be in touch soon.